So just going back to the sort of the main focus of your book, one of the things that sort of also like took me aback by a little bit is you keep you talk about the behavioral genetics and you talk about the twin studies, adoption studies. That's all great research. I think it's such important research. I don't think it's not even for just for education. I think for everything, every field. I think you gotta take genetics seriously. But you keep introducing this qualification that says, you know. This does not mean we have to accept racist or sexist theories of group differences. And you say it once, you say it twice, and then I'm like, okay, please not again. And then it comes again, and then you keep saying, I want to re-emphasize it again. Just put aside race because it's so. It's such a combustible and difficult issue. Like sex differences, like is it a sexist theory to believe that men and women have different qualities, and in a perfectly free system would gravitate towards different fields and interests? Is that something that it's bad for people to believe? Because I sort of got the impression that I sort of got that impression from the book.
So I think the first thing I'll say is I would have look. I don't believe, although people constantly think that I do. I don't believe that in the sort of race science theory that is typically accredited to Charles Murray, although I think that his own views are more complicated than people think. I would have liked to have written it written it once, excuse me, but I couldn't have gotten it published by St. Martin's if I didn't.
Okay, that's
sorry, I was a first time author, and they're one of the biggest booksellers in the world. I didn't have, So look, I will say, I would start with the thing is that, the empirical record on intellectual differences between men and women is not as strong as people seem to think. Like, there's fat tails theory. So fat tails theory is the idea that there is greater variability in men's intelligence than in women, so that men are more likely to be dullards than to be and to be geniuses than women. So that you have there's a broader range, but there's data sets in which that doesn't appear to be true. Some people will say that only one tail or the other is fat compared to the other thing. And it also is, I think that the more G loaded a test is, when people say that, the more it means the more that an IQ test is designed to test only raw cognitive processing, as opposed to things that could be considered enculturated, right? So, for example, there's a thing called Raven's progressive matrices. And Raven's progressive matrices, people always complain, these tests are cultural. There's not even any words in a Raven's progressive matrices. It's just they show you a series, they show you three diagrams in a row, and that'll be it'll be a picture, and maybe the first one, there's a black dot in the upper left corner, then upper right corner, then a lower right corner, and then you have to pick which the last one is, right, from a range of choices. So you're looking at how things are sort of spinning spatially, and you're trying to sort of predict what comes next based on the pattern established beforehand. It's, as far as I understand, it's just not the case, right, that more G-loaded tests are showing higher capacity for men than tests that are less G-loaded, which is what you'd expect if there was a strong sort of gender difference, and what you expect if culture was particularly meaningful. So, for me, empirically, I'm not convinced that we have the evidence that this is true simply in the quantitative sense. I do think that in many of the contexts in which this happens, culture is probably pretty strong in terms of dictating sort of what looks like an attractive position to people. However, I will also say that there really is a pipeline problem. And it really does appear that a lot of women self-select out of these things. The trouble is that you're never going to convince people who are inclined one way or the other to decide, okay, are these sort of cultural preferences aspects of some sort of nature that are are evolutionarily conditioned, or are they the product of a sort of bias? So, for example, there's about as many math majors at the undergraduate level of women who are women as men. Right, it's a little bit more men, but it's traditionally it's just about as many number of women who are going into it. However, there's dramatically fewer women graduate students. Some people will say, well, that's because men are better at math. Other people have said, well, look, if you actually look at what's happening, a far higher percentage of the women who are math majors are going to be K through 12 teachers in math, right? And this is probably a rational decision for them to make because it's a steady and stable career path in which you can do math and use your math degree to get a good middle class job. And many men face the stigma where they don't want to be K-12 teachers. Who's right? I don't know. I am not closing my mind to the possibility that
Yeah.
there are sex differences in the sort of tendency to be good at math or not. But I think that the evidence is slighter than people think. And frankly, if you look at the sort of the curve, right, if you're just looking over time, women are catching up like crazy because women are absolutely clobbering men in the classroom right now. And it's going to become a bigger and bigger deal over
Yeah,
time
well,
in
the fact
general.
that women are clobbering the men in some things and not other things, like they're doing very well in biology and not doing very well in physics. I think you have
Mhm.
to like play around a lot to say, well, biology has overcome, millennia of structural sexism, but physics hasn't. Like, what's wrong with you physicists? Like, they must be uniquely
Right.
terrible people.
But I do have to say, like, there's a lot of math in research biology, right? Like I'm saying, like, like
Yeah. But it's
I,
not just G. It's not just G. I mean, to be a mathematician, you've got to have G. That's just one factor of many. You have to
right,
have the passion of it compared to everything else you can be doing. If women are just more interested in people and equally interested in things, they'll just gravitate towards the people centered stuff, right? So to assume that you'll get to have in a fair system you'd have equal amount of mathematicians or whatever, you'd have to assume not just G is equal, but you need everything to be equal, because if they're
right, but
equal in G and they're different in ambition or work ethic or interest or whatever, then you won't get equality.
right, but I reference the emerging gender gap in education broadly because to say that, like, um, if we were not careful, if we wanted to do a particularly clumsy analysis, you could just look at that and say, well, women are smarter than men, right? If you take a look at a big, broad, like
It's
not just like
something certainly. I mean, I
right.
think the SAT is a better measure than GPA, and I don't think women are beating men there. So you
Okay, yeah,
want to
well, I agree, but what I'm saying is just that, like, we shouldn't just say, "Oh, hey, look, there's so many more biologists than physicists among women." The simplistic story is that they're smarter in those domains because, like, again, like in many metrics, even that are tilted quantitatively, right? Like the number of women who are entering into STEM fields now outpaces the number of men simply because now again the proportions are different and that does point in the direction that you're talking about, right? But women have opened up such an overwhelming advantage of men in terms of getting to the stage of college of enrolling in college and getting to the stage where they declare a major, that now depending on whose numbers you look at, there's we're looking at like equity in many STEM fields. And so again, I think this is just to say, like, culture does matter, economics does matter, and these sort of social sciencey things are not things that we should wave our hand away and say that they don't matter.